Welcome to the debate. Think of the most successful CEO you know, like the person who just closed a massive funding round, who leads a team of hundreds, who seems to possess this, unshakable visionary confidence.
We all know the type.
Right. Now consider this. Biologically speaking, their nervous system might actually be indistinguishable from someone being chased by a predator. So today we are looking at the architecture of high achievement, and specifically the profound private burden carried by leaders, founders, and executives. I mean, why is it that people at the absolute apex of their fields, people surrounded all day by teams, colleagues, board members, family, why do they still experience this quiet, crushing sense of isolation and exhaustion?
Yeah, it really is the ultimate paradox of success, isn't it? I mean, from the outside, you see the penthouse view, you see the influence, the resources. But from the inside, the experience is, well, it's often one of being trapped in a fortress of your own making.
Exactly. And our discourse today is anchored in Muzab Khaldi's Four Empires framework. We're specifically drawing from the introduction to his 12 Days to Change Your Life protocol, because this material directly confronts the reality of these highly capable people who are, the pillars for everyone else, yet they are secretly running on fumes.
Right. And where we diverge, where our debate really centers today, is on the actual mechanism required to resolve this executive isolation.
Right, because I argue that this isolation is fundamentally a structural issue. It's a symptom of internal fragmentation among a leader's core faculties, and it absolutely must be solved through self-directed daily architecture and really rigorous neurological rewiring.
And I look at this entirely differently. I just don't think you can fix this in a biological vacuum, because the isolation they feel is inherently relational. It's environmental. So while internal rewiring obviously has its place, true relief from this specific burden requires a strictly confidential external coaching space. It requires an environment where the leader can finally just drop the performance of strength.
Well, let me lay out why the structural view is so critical first. Because the exhaustion and that profound loneliness of leadership, it stems from a fragmentation among what the framework calls a leader's four internal empires. That's mindset, heart set, health set, and soul set.
The four pillars.
Exactly. Let's break that down, because the source material maps this out so brilliantly. If you have mindset, which is, your logic, your vision, but you lack heart set, you develop this cold, impenetrable confidence. You make great strategic decisions, sure, but you actively push people away emotionally.
Right, you become a machine.
You do. Conversely, if you have deep heart set work but zero health set, you might have immense empathy for your team, but you possess absolutely zero biological energy to actually execute the vision. So the burden of leadership feels crushing because the leader's internal architecture is operating in these isolated silos.
Look, the internal silo effect is very real. I'm not denying that. But I think you're misdiagnosing the primary driver of the pain here.
Just hear me out on the biology first, okay? Because your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for executive function and complex decision-making, it literally cannot function optimally without heart coherence. And heart coherence can't be sustained without physical vitality. This is why the ultimate solution has to be an internal structural rebuild.
Okay, but
I'm talking about the 12-day neural rewiring protocol here. It initiates with a very specific 20-20-20 morning routine. When a leader takes neurological command of the first 60 minutes, spending 20 minutes moving, 20 minutes reflecting, and 20 minutes learning, they are physically building an integrated anti-fragile internal state. When you fix the internal fragmentation, you stop projecting the signals that create that external isolation.
I mean, I understand the biology, and the neuroscience behind neuroplasticity is undeniable. But let's actually look at the environment this leader operates in. The core burden we are discussing isn't just an internal misalignment of their four empires. It is the sheer, overwhelming relational expectation placed on them by their ecosystem.
But that ecosystem, let's just be practical for a second. You can wake up at 5 a.m. You can flawlessly execute your 20 minutes of movement, your reflection, your learning. You can prime your brain perfectly. But if you spend the next 12 hours as the sole pillar that 50 different people rely on for their livelihoods, for their direction, their validation, you are still relationally isolated.
But you are meeting that immense demand from a state of integration rather than a state of depletion. And that changes everything about how the burden feels. Does it, though? Meeting the demand with a better biological battery doesn't mean the relational demand just disappears. True relief from that specific burden, the burden of constantly being the capable one, it cannot be generated purely in isolation on a yoga mat.
I think that's reductive.
It's not, though. It requires an external, completely confidential space. I'm talking about the deliberate choice to work with an executive coach. Like, perhaps that means stepping entirely out of your context to meet with an executive coach in Lisbon, or maybe establishing a secure virtual sanctuary from wherever you are. But it has to be a space where the executive does not have to be the boss, or the provider, or the visionary.
Right, but
Executive coaching at this tier, it's not some quick performance hack or a productivity tool to squeeze out more margins. It is a vital, private relationship designed for clearer decisions and sustainable leadership, precisely because it is the only place in their life where they do not have to perform.
you're jumping straight to the external environment. But I really think that ignores the root cause of this quote-unquote empty success. Let's look at Musa Haldi's own origin story in the material. At age 20, he literally collapsed and was unconscious for 55 minutes.
Right.
That wasn't because he didn't have a safe space to talk, It was fundamentally a physiological and neurological failure caused by prioritizing external achievement over an internal foundation. When founders come into this coaching framework, they are often operating with cortisol levels at 78 nanograms per milliliter.
And we really need to contextualize that number because it's staggering.
It is, exactly. For context, a normal healthy morning peak for cortisol is roughly somewhere around 10 to 20 nanograms per milliliter. So at 78, we are talking about a state of severe, chronic biological stress. It means their nervous system is perpetually screaming that they are in mortal danger.
Yeah, they're in constant fight or flight.
Right. The issue isn't just the weight of the CEO title, it's trying to carry that weight with a dysregulated nervous system and a prefrontal cortex that is essentially offline due to panic. Right now, a burned-out leader's brain has an 8-lane superhighway built entirely for anxiety and reaction.
I see where you're going.
So if you don't use a structured protocol to basically hack a new path through that neural jungle, the system will seize. It's like a high-performance engine running without oil. It doesn't matter what road you're on or who you talk to. If your biology is failing, your leadership fails.
I don't dispute the severity of the biological failure. I really don't. But I don't buy that it's exclusively an internal, structural failing that they brought upon themselves by, skipping a morning routine.
That's a bit of an oversimplification.
Well, let me tell you why I say that. The framework explicitly identifies a specific avatar, the grade D persona, and we need to define what that actually means. The grade D persona is the lone executive at the top who feels entirely isolated and who lacks any true peers to confide in. The material notes that these individuals are often totally unreachable by standard marketing because they are completely enveloped by gatekeepers, assistants, demanding boards of directors.
Right.
They live in an ecosystem composed entirely of people who want things from them.
Which is exactly why they need to armor their internal state.
But the armor is the problem. That cortisol spike you're referencing, that 78 NGML, it doesn't just appear out of a vacuum because they forgot to breathe in the morning. It is a highly adaptive physiological response to a hostile relational environment.
Hostile is a strong word.
But it feels hostile to the nervous system. If you're a founder listening to this, you're probably rolling your eyes at the idea of taking 60 minutes for yourself when you have 100 unread emails and investors demanding answers right now. Your body is producing cortisol because your environment demands a heavily armored posture. You cannot simply breathe your way out of an ecosystem that structurally requires you to be infallible.
I see why you frame it that way, but you are conflating the environment with the perception of the environment. Yes, the demands are real, but the perception of those demands as a survival threat, which is what actually triggers the massive cortisol dump, that is controlled entirely by the internal architecture.
Okay.
Look at the data. By day 12 of the Four Empires protocol, the data shows cortisol dropping down to 31 NGML. Think about what that means. The board of directors hasn't changed, the aggressive revenue targets haven't changed, the emails are still there.
Right.
What changed was the leader's internal capacity to process that environment without viewing it as a threat to their physical survival. By taking those 60 minutes to shift from a reactive state to a deliberate state, the leader takes control of the physiological response.
Lowering the stress response is a necessary triage. Yes, I'll give you that. But managing the physical symptom doesn't cure the relational disease of loneliness, which actually brings us perfectly into the tension between the heart set and the health set. Because you look at the health set, the pure biology, as the ultimate bedrock.
Because it unequivocally is. The material is very clear on this sequence. You can have the sharpest mind and the most authentic heart, but without physical vitality, you will crash. Sustainable high performance requires sustainable biological energy.
I agree with that in principle, but
Let's just look at the mechanism. If a leader isn't getting 7 to 9 hours of optimal sleep architecture, their brain literally cannot clear metabolic waste or consolidate learning from the day. They're operating with a poisoned physical hard drive.
why aren't they sleeping? It's not a lack of sleep hygiene knowledge, usually.
Often, it's a lack of morning discipline that sets the circadian rhythm in the first place. If they aren't engaging in that 20 minutes of intense movement to hit 120 to 140 BPM heart rate in the morning, they are missing out on the release of BDNF.
Right, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Exactly. It's essentially miracle fertilizer for the brain. It is the chemical that makes neuroplasticity, the forming of new habits and emotional responses, physically possible. Without BDNF, cognitive function stays at a depleted 38% rather than the 94% they could achieve.
Sure.
My point is that emotional isolation, the heart set issue you're so focused on, it is massively exacerbated by depleted physical energy. You simply cannot regulate complex, nuanced emotions or have a vulnerable connection with your team if you are biologically running on fumes.
That is a very clean biological explanation. It is. But I want to push back on the causality here, because I think it runs in the exact opposite direction.
Really?
Yes. I view the drain on physical energy strictly through the lens of the heart set. The physical exhaustion these leaders feel isn't just from a lack of sleep or, a lack of morning cardio. It is the immense metabolic cost of the emotional labor required to constantly perform strength. It takes a staggering amount of caloric and psychological energy to wear armor all day, to project certainty when you actually feel terrified, to hold the anxiety of the entire company so your team doesn't panic.
And the Four Empires Protocol addresses that through the heart-brain coherence practices.
It does, but it requires a huge leap of faith. The source material outlines the heart-brain coherence protocol, and it states this profound paradox. It says, the more authentic you become, the more powerfully you lead. But getting to that level of authenticity and vulnerability, it requires a baseline of psychological safety.
Right.
A burnt-out founder cannot simply decide to be vulnerable and drop their armor with their board of directors on day one. The risk is just too high. If a CEO walks into a board meeting and says, guys, I'm exhausted and I don't know what to do, the stock price tanks or they get replaced.
But they don't start by being vulnerable with the board. They start by being honest with themselves.
Up to a point, but you cannot truly validate your own blind spots alone in a room. That is precisely why they need that private, confidential coaching space first. They need an external relational container, like a peer who isn't on their payroll, who doesn't report to them, and who has zero stake in their company's daily operations. They need to process that fatigue and uncertainty without judgment before they can safely integrate that heart set into their public leadership.
Hold on, let me stop you there because you're assuming they need another human being to generate that initial feeling of safety. And the neuroscience provided in the framework suggests otherwise.
How so?
Well, the 15-minute heart coherence practice isn't about spilling your deepest fears to your board, and it's not even about spilling them to a coach immediately. It's an internal mechanical shift. When you inhale for 5 seconds and exhale for 5 seconds, you are mechanically stimulating the vagus nerve, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system. You speak your truth to yourself first.
Right.
You put a hand on your heart and you acknowledge, I am exhausted, I am scared. Those authentic words, combined with the breath, literally shift the nervous system out of a state of scarcity. You don't necessarily need another human being in the room to initiate that parasympathetic shift. You generate your own safety through the health set and heart set practices. That internal regulation is what then allows you to walk into the boardroom with a totally different, grounded, energetic signature.
Look, I will grant you that the internal parasympathetic shift, stimulating that vagus nerve, it's a powerful starting line. But let's look at the actual mechanism of sustainable transformation over the long term. You place the entire weight of transformation on self-directed neural rewiring.
I do, because the data from the Four Empire system is extraordinary when people actually do the work. We are looking at 172% improvement in emotional regulation, 194% boost in energy and vitality, and 112% increase in decision quality within just 12 days.
Those numbers are great, but
Let's translate those numbers into human reality. 172% improvement in emotional regulation isn't just like feeling a bit more zen. It is the literal difference between snapping at your CFO and destroying team morale versus having the neurological bandwidth to calmly absorb a crisis and pivot the company. And how is this achieved? Through the individual taking absolute neurological command of their own life.
Okay, 12 days of discipline is fantastic, but it's just the diagnostic phase.
It's the transition from phase 1, the destruction of old reactive habits, to phase 2, the installation of new neural circuits. When a leader strictly owns the first 60 minutes of the day, when they execute the decision architecture mental rehearsal on day 2, literally visualizing a challenge and rehearsing a calm, regulated response, they are physically changing their brain plasticity. The power of this framework lies in the autonomy. It is the profound realization that you don't need a savior, you need a system.
the system is brilliant, yes. I am not disputing a 194% boost in vitality. But the framework explicitly addresses what happens after day 12. It asks the leader, what is your fragmentation costing you? And it points toward the 66-day deepening.
Right.
This is where the real permanent automaticity phase takes root. And while self-directed deepening is technically an option, the material heavily emphasizes the profound, life-altering value of the high-ticket, one-on-one executive coaching options.
Because some people need accountability to stick to the system.
It is far more than just accountability, though. It is the deep, mirroring reflection of a trusted peer-to-peer relationship. Think about it. A grade D leader who is utterly isolated at the top, seeking out an executive coach in Lisbon, or maybe flying in for a weekend diagnostic intensive.
Yeah.
That represents a deliberate physical choice to step completely out of the daily grind. It is stepping into a physical and mental space dedicated purely to wholeness, not hustle. Musab Kali notes in the material that he spent over $300,000 trying to fix these fragmented pieces separately. The $15,000 to $45,000 private coaching tiers aren't just selling you a glorified daily planner or a workout routine.
I'm not saying they are.
They are providing a $300,000 plus transformation, precisely because the leader is finally engaging with an expert who speaks their language, someone who understands their MBA-level business problems, but who ruthlessly forces them to confront their soul set.
But you don't necessarily need a coach to force you to confront your soul set if you actually follow the protocol.
I just don't think you can fully integrate your purpose and legacy, which is, the day 10 mortality meditation, in the framework in an echo chamber. You need a mirror.
I entirely reject the idea that the self-directed protocol is an echo chamber. The protocol is designed to violently disrupt your echo chamber and force you to confront reality.
How?
Take the Day 11 service protocol. The leader is explicitly instructed to shift their entire operating system from get to give. They are told to mentor someone with absolutely no expectation of return, or to volunteer their specific expertise. This shifts the nervous system from a state of scarcity and isolation into a state of abundance and connection.
Right, but
The architecture. They don't need to fly to Europe to realize their business should be a vehicle for their purpose, rather than their purpose itself. They just need the discipline to sit quietly, regulate their nervous system, and do the 20-minute mortality meditation. If I have 6 months to live, what becomes completely irrelevant?
doing a mortality meditation alone in your office at 6 a.m. is profound. I won't deny that. But remember who we're talking about here, the grade D profile, the highly isolated, highly defended executive. When you do that meditation alone, your ego can still protect you. Your defense mechanisms can still filter the answers. That's a fair point. But having a peer-level executive coach look you in the eye in a confidential space and ask, why are you still running a company that makes you miserable? That is transformational. The private coaching space is where the armor is permanently dismantled, not just temporarily lowered for 20 minutes before you go check Slack. It is the difference between reading a book about psychological safety and actually experiencing unconditional psychological safety with another human being whose only agenda is your wholeness.
Well, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground here, dissecting the true architecture of executive isolation. My position remains firmly rooted in the biology and the structure. Sustainable leadership absolutely must begin with the neurological and physiological integration of the 4 empires: mindset, heart set, health set, and soul set.
Yeah.
If your prefrontal cortex is starved of BDNF, if you aren't clearing metabolic waste in your sleep, and if your cortisol is peaking at 8 a.m. because you're treating emails like literal predators, no amount of talking in a safe space will save your leadership. You just have to put the right fuel in the engine through strict daily architecture.
And I maintain that while that internal rewiring and biological regulation is the absolute prerequisite for change, leaders desperately need an external, strictly confidential sanctuary. You simply cannot dismantle a lifetime of armored performance purely in isolation. You need a trusted, peer-to-peer relationship to validate your humanity, to hold up a mirror to your blind spots, and to help you safely integrate that vulnerable heart set into your highly public, high-stakes leadership role.
Absolutely, but where we definitely share agreement today is on the value of the drive itself. Ambition is a tremendous asset. It should never be shamed, and it shouldn't be diminished. Wanting to build an empire, wanting to carry the responsibility of a team, that is a beautiful thing.
Completely. No one is telling leaders to stop being ambitious. But we also agree that success without wholeness is nothing more than a slow collapse. It is basically building a skyscraper on a fractured foundation. Leaders at the top of their game, the ones carrying the heaviest burdens, they deserve both the rigorous internal tools and the private external spaces necessary to thrive sustainably. The 4 Empires framework offers a really rich ongoing exploration for any ambitious professional who is quietly feeling the immense weight of the top.
It really does. It forces you to look at the load-bearing walls of your own life, both biologically and emotionally, which leaves us with a critical reflection to consider as we wrap up our discourse today. Where in your life are you expected to be strong but rarely given space to be honest?
If this conversation helped you see something more clearly, take the free 4 Empires assessment at musaabkhaldi.com/assessment. And if you would like a private conversation about your leadership, business, or personal direction, you can book a free discovery call with Musaab Khaldi at musaabkhaldi.com.